Scott, go
All
ahead.
right. Hello. Good morning. Because since most of you are in LA, I a lot of times at this time I'm speaking to Europe still, so which is evening for them. So good morning to all of you. Thanks for joining. And today we're going to talk about one of your favorite topics, ice cream. And although this one's a little different because it starts with ICE, actually, ISE. And so we'll go through a little presentation. Um, Myself and Thomas Howard, who's an ICE TME who has been around, well, since the beginning of ICE. He is joining me today, and he'll be talking about demo, technical, how to deploy, a lot of great stuff around ICE. So he'll be joining me. I will start out with talking to you about what ICE is, what it does, why it's important, what you should know if you're a customer about ICE. There's some things you probably want to know. And then Thomas is going to take it from there. So we want to keep this interactive. So, I'll leave it up to you guys. If you want to come off of mute, raise your hand, put in the chat. We're flexible. So however you want to talk, we're here to listen, whatever that means. So with that, we will get started. All right. So ICE, Identity Services Engine. It's been around for a while. It's been around for 10 years or more, actually. I think it was launched 10 years ago, actually. It's got 61,000 customers, which is a very large base of customers that have purchased ICE over the last 10 years. We'll talk about, we'll talk a lot about the product today, what it is, what it does, what its capabilities are, but you should know that it scales to the highest end. We've got multiple 5 million endpoint customers type of deployments around the globe. Think of the largest entities in the world, and a lot of times they are using ICE. But specifically, it really scales into the customers that are using it are healthcare, retail, finance, government, manufacturing, utilities. Those are probably the top 5 or 6 verticals, but it is everywhere. And the reason why it's everywhere is on the bottom left here, which is it is the glue. It sort of sits between networking and security, and you'll see in a couple minutes why that is. So we call it the glue because it really, it could be a network admin, doing ICE, but it also could be a security or security operations team managing ICE. But this is bringing both organizations typically together around policy, specifically around network access control, zero trust, and segmentation. And that's why those two organizations care about all of those things, and that's why it's the glue and sits in the middle. So what is it? It's actually software. It's software that has that delivers the capability of providing capabilities for you to see everything that is on your network, including users, devices, network devices, and how they're using and attaching to applications. So it's the who, the what, the where from a device perspective. We want to know if it's Jason or if it's Thomas, and if they're using a phone or an iPad or a PC or a Mac, or if it's a robot and it's on a manufacturing line, or if it's a temperature sensor, or if it's a heart pump in a hospital. It's those sorts of things that are attached to the network. And then once we can see those things and everything that's attaching to your network, we can help you secure those things, whether it's a device or a pump or a sensor, whatever it is. We can help you secure that. We can help you segment that. And then, oh, by the way, we can help share that. We can share that to other tools that you might be using. And I'm going to show you just a snapshot of the over 400 plus integrations where we can share that information with other systems. And so that's what ICE is. It's role-based access control around secure access to your network or your networks. So that's what it is. Why it's important? Well, it helps you. The way I look at it is, I talked to a CIO one time, and I said, look, here's the deal. If you could see everything that's attaching to your network or trying to attach to your network or networks, once we can figure out what it is, why it's attaching, then you can establish some policy around that thing or whatever it is. And then that policy will help you figure out their place in the network, what access control they have, and what access they have to applications. And at the end of the day, that's what ICE helps you do. So we can gain visibility with context and control for everything, whether it's a network device, whether it's a switch, a router, an access point, or whether it's a user using an iPhone, an iPad, a Samsung device, or whether it's a thing on your manufacturing line or in your operations. We can help you figure out what that is. Once you figure out what it is, we can help you secure that by providing secure access to those networks, and then help you segment that, limiting things like ransomware and other breaches into your systems through segmentation, thus future-proofing your entire network security. Now, it's not all about ICE. ICE does that with other things as well. ICE is just a component of that. So when I mean component, and zero trust is sort of a buzzword in the industry today, and we're certainly a very large piece of that. So we can help establish trust of users, devices, and things that are attaching to your network. We can then enforce access to your network through policy. And then once you are attached, we can continuously verify that through profiling and posturing of devices. And if something changes, we can do something about it. And we can limit access through a firewall. We can do something on a switch port. We can quarantine that device. We can make sure it's remediated or self-remediated automatically or manually. So those are the sorts of things we can do with ICE. So what does it look like? This is sort of on the left-hand side. This might be how an enterprise network team, the networking people, might look at ICE. They can look at it from whatever's attaching to the network, whether it's a user or device or a thing, or if it's a network device, switches, access points, could be concentrators, could be VPN, network devices. And so ICE sees all of that on the left-hand side. And then on the right-hand side, think of security, Active Directory, MDM, SAML, who's attaching around firewalls, cloud, who's accessing cloud and applications that are in on-prem or in a data center somewhere or in the cloud. So that's sort of the two organizations. And right in the middle is ICE controlling access and policy to all of that. So that's what ICE is. We can help see it, secure it, and share it. And now I'll give you just some use cases on probably the most popular use cases. There are literally dozens of these. I'm just going to go through the most popular ones and some of the easier ones, and I'm going to put them in a context of see, secure, and share. So in the yellow, you'll see the stuff that's around how we see it. Why is it that building? Oh, there we go. Okay. All right. So this is all about those use cases that have something to do with how we can see things on the network. So first of all, and this is something probably we all do every day, and you're going to get this, right? So when you go into your office or you go into anywhere and you attach to the wireless network, ICE can help authenticate and authorize access to the wireless network. So we can enable that, whether it's a corporate owned device where we're integrating with an MDM, or we're providing that ourselves through ICE, or we can provide guest Wi-Fi. So guest Wi-Fi is probably one of the most easiest, most simple, most basic functions and capabilities that ICE delivers. But we also do more things around intent-based access across wired, wireless, and VPN. So this would be allowing those switches, those access points, the network itself, and providing access to those devices. So letting people that we know who have credentials, role-based access control, that can make configuration changes on those devices. That's also where ICE comes into play. And then asset visibility. So we can see what's on the network and where they're located, whether they're in Office A, Building 3 connected to access point 29, or whether wired and they're coming on switch port X across Building 2, right? We could tell and give you asset visibility to see what's on your network. But we'll also talk about how we can see that through we can partner with other solutions like ServiceNow and CMDB to actually correlate what that's in the CMDB to where those assets are. So that's how ICE and ServiceNow might work together. And then, oh, by the way, we can enforce access based on asset visibility. So we know, for example, that if an access point in Building 3, Floor 2, certain people aren't supposed to access that access, but we can control that as well through ICE. And now we'll talk about how we can secure and some of those use cases. So we can provide, for example, compliance. That's one of the big functions for ICE, particularly in government or finance and even healthcare. We can actually see whether that device in particular is patched with your certain, your requirements, whatever those might be. If it has the right OS, for example, at Cisco requires patched and updated software running on iPhones and iPads and Samsung devices to be updated to the latest. And so they'll actually force through ICE an upgrade. So as a user, so we can do that through compliance, and that's one of the big ones through that ICE provides. And then BYOD, we can help onboard devices onto the network, and then device admin I talked a little bit about earlier. And then the last one is how we can help share that context. And so one of the biggest things is we can provide, we see who all is connected to the network. We see all of the network devices connected to the network and providing network. We can now segment those users and devices into segments. And that's one of the big benefits of ICE. That's how a lot of .1x is started and makes it a lot easier with ICE. And then when you couple that with things like Catalyst Center to help automate that, that's where ICE with Catalyst Center works around helping automate to software-defined access. And that's sort of the beauty of those two products working together. But on the bottom right in the middle, we have integrations. Like I said before, there's almost 400 integrations or over 400 integrations. I'm going to show you some of those in a little bit, but think about, I talked about ServiceNow, but think about MDM, Microsoft Intune, and all of the host of MDM solutions out there for user devices. That's where ICE and those products come together to provide user device context and compliance and posture and a full BYOD range of solutions there. So those are just few of the most popular capabilities around customer use cases. There are literally dozens more. But you might be thinking about if you're new to ICE, what does this look like? So it's been around 10 years. So it has made its journey, if you will, from an appliance-based to a VM-based to now a cloud-based delivery deployment model. So certainly we have ICE appliances that are used in some of the larger instances and larger deployments. Those would be on-prem appliances, especially in government or air-gap networks. They're using those appliances typically there. And in large campuses, typically appliances are used there as well. But it could also be on a VM, and you can run your own hardware. It can also be delivered and deployed through the cloud, AWS, Oracle, and not Google, but Azure. So AWS and Azure. Those are the three most popular ones. Google will be coming shortly. So that means all the major cloud delivery models will be available for ICE. It's also flexible management, infrastructure as a code. So if you want to use Terraform or Ansible to do things, we could certainly do that. It's got open APIs. Thomas will talk to you a little bit more about that. And then super flexible around wired, wireless, VPN, even 5G, private 5G is where we're securing access to all of those environments. And then the next slide, I think I talk about integrations. So when I talk about integrations, we talk about taking context into ICE from another tool. So I'll use ServiceNow as an example for that. We could take ServiceNow CMDB and take that context from ServiceNow and attach it to ICE so we can understand, for example, what users might be attaching to a particular access point for providing access. Or we can also look at context out. So information that ICE has in its purview, we can provide visibility out to other tools. So think context in, Splunk coming in and coming out, we could provide value to Medigate or Order or one of our other ecosystem partners to provide pretty much it's usually all around user information that we're providing out to other tool sets. And then here's where they both work together in conjunction: context in, context out, which really the two together provide rapid threat containment. So ICE is looking at continuously verifying that trust of a user and device, but other tools might be looking at real-time traffic and anomalous behavior coming in and out of networks. And then those two can feed back to ICE. ICE can then say on a rule set, hey, quarantine that, do something with that. It's out of policy and it's out of whatever. Now ICE can help you segment and stop and contain that threat, whatever it was. So that's ICE working with another tool set to do that together and help mitigate something. And Thomas will go into a little bit more detail there. So this next slide may be a little bit busy, but I think you'll get the context of the types of integrations that are available. So I'll pause here and let you guys look at this, because I guarantee you're running one of these or multiple of these in your environment and it's existing. And what I can tell you is that's good news, because ICE can work with that to provide more business value with ICE and something else coming together. And to give you a different view of what this looks like, I'll click here. And so we've got some of these sort of segmented down. So IoT security in the middle. Those are all the products that we actually work with, like Order and Medigate. If you look at some of the SIMs, most popular SIMs, Splunk being one of them, which now will be hopefully soon a Cisco company. We'll be providing more value there for our customers. On the right-hand side, you see some of the Cisco integrations, which are Cisco products that ICE integrates with. And Thomas will talk about a little bit some of the newer ones around ICE and Duo, ICE and Umbrella, ICE and Catalyst Center, and some of the value around those things that you might be running from Cisco. And last thing here, some of the most popular MDM solutions that we integrate with. I'd say Microsoft's probably the most popular, but you can see all of the others here that we also integrate with. Okay, so these last two slides, I want to talk to an existing ICE customer, which there may be on this call. So if you are an existing ICE customer, pay attention now. So there are, as you know, as an ICE customer, ICE has made its journey from perpetual licenses to a subscription license model. That means ICE 2.x has now moved to ICE 3.x. We're actually delivering 3.3 at the moment. Customers must migrate. And the reason why is because we have end of life, end of support, and end of maintenance on the ICE 2.x train. We still have, remember I told you earlier, we have 61,000 total customers that have purchased ICE. About 30,000 have already migrated. There are about 20,000 more that need to do something, and you need to do something by September 2024. That's about 10 months from now. The first thing you must do is upgrade your licensing from 2 to 3. The second thing you need to do at some point, and you have a little bit of leeway here into 2025, but you need to upgrade your deployment from the 2.x train to the 3.0 train or 3.x train. And the third thing you need to do, which is optional, But if you are running appliances, we have new appliances out. So you probably want to upgrade your appliances. So what's driving this is end of life, end of support, and end of maintenance on ICE 2.7, which is the latest version on the 2.x train of code. There are a number of resources available to help you do this and guide you through this process. Again, like I said, we've had 30,000 people already do this. So you are certainly, I would say you're in the laggard stage at this point, but we want to get it out. And so to help you do this also, we have resources here on the right, but there is also a promotion that will help ease the burden of any from budgetary constraints. So ICE 3.x licenses, if you migrated your, so in the old world, it was base was the most basic license tier. You need to upgrade that or move that over to essentials in the 3.x train, and we'll provide a year for free to do that, which means you buy a 3-year term license and you will only pay for 2. If you migrate to Advantage or Premier, which are the second and third tiers of the licensing, we'll give you a 1.5 years free. So for a 3-year commitment, you will only pay for a 1.5 years. And so it's a pretty simple promotion to help you do that because there will be some costs involved. And if you have any questions, ping me after. Happy to help through that. But with that, I think, my friend Thomas, well, I guess we could pause and see if there's any questions, but that's the end of my show, so to speak.
I didn't see any questions. I'll give everyone a chance to unmute again, though. Give me a second here. Oh, yeah, looks like.
I was enjoying looking at your harbor view, Scott.
It is raining right now.
Oh, we're starting to get sprinkles, so yes,
Yeah.
right there with you.
Yeah, I don't see any questions. I will put Scott's email into the chat, so if you do want to contact him about those, I definitely recommend if you're an ICE customer on that 2.x platform, you want to take advantage of that because it does make a huge difference.
All right. Well, with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. And if you guys want to interrupt me, go ahead and do that by taking yourself off mute. That's perfectly fine. So I'm Thomas Howard. I'm one of the ICE technical marketing engineers. And really what I want to do is kind of take what Scott started talking about and kind of give you some more deep dives into those and show you some demos. So the first thing was obviously establishing trust, not only with your users or your devices, but potentially understanding more about what the device is with profiling, posture, things like that, and even getting information from other sources, like you said, with PX Grid. Then, of course, what we want to do is enforce that trust-based access, either with VLANs, access control lists, or ideally software-defined segmentation using TrustSec and SDA. Then with all of our integrations with our security partners, we can allow them to continuously verify that trust, because once we've authenticated, we put them on the network, right? We've done our job with principle of least privilege. Now it's up to the other security products to do their thing and figure out if they're misbehaving or if they haven't been patched or whatever it is that they do. Then finally, if for some reason we detect that they're not behaving correctly, we have that option to change their authorization to limit their access, quarantine their access, so that they're not going to be a risk to us. So that's kind of the things I want to show you with demos. But first, just want to make sure everyone understands basically how this works. If you haven't seen or played with Radius access control before, the idea is we want to be able to authenticate users and devices, ideally with the IEEE 802.1x protocol using some kind of credential material over there on the left. But there is a huge array of devices, especially with IoT growing these days, that either can't do it or won't do it because their administrators haven't bothered to provision them with the necessary credentials to do it. And that happens to be the case with a lot of phones and cameras and other things. I know I've had, really inexpensive IP cameras in my home, looking at the backyard, the front yard, things like that for like over 10 years, and they can do 802.1x, but does Thomas take the time to configure it? No, he's got better things to do. And that's probably the same thing a lot of your administrators are, the way they work in your network too. They got other priorities, right? But ideally, if we can authenticate them, we have a bunch of access control policies that we run through to authenticate the endpoints or the users, authorize them to the network, and of course establish some kind of accounting so we know who came in, where they were coming in from, how they got authenticated, things like that, for auditing purposes. And then, like I said, we want to be able to enforce that principle of least privilege based on the capabilities of that network device. And so depending upon whether it's just a very simple, layer 2 switch, maybe we can just do VLAN changes. But ideally, if it's, a more modern, more security focused and capable kind of, layer 3 or layer 4 switch, we can do access control lists and ideally security group tags for software defined segmentation. So that's basically how the process works. And just kind of real quick, when we look at access control, the things we're looking to do is understand the who, what, when, where, why, how of the network, who's coming in, what are they trying to do, all that kind of stuff. And the way we capture that in ISE is in forms of a policy. So you can see we have rule names, which really captures kind of the why. What's that scenario? Why are they coming into our network? What are we trying to do here? And then we can write a bunch of rules that are basically some kind of Boolean expression that try to capture the when, the who, maybe what is coming in, where they're coming in from. And then based on that, we will try to determine how much access we want to give them to our network based on some kind of a authorization profile that we return to that network device to say, put them in this VLAN, assign this ACL, assign this security group tag, things like that. Or just deny them completely if nothing matches, right? So those are the kinds of things that we're looking at doing in terms of a policy. So what I want to do real quick is go ahead and give you all kind of an idea what that looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and authenticate with my iPad. I think hopefully most of you have already done this. This is really nothing special in your enterprise wireless. I'm going to associate to a .corp SSID as Thomas on my iPad. I'm going to put in my password, and then you may be asked to go ahead and trust that certificate from the ICE server if you hadn't done it before. And then once that's done, you can go ahead and flip over, open a web browser, and test out your access, just like at an airport, a coffee shop, anywhere else. And this is a fantastic page to go test your access out on. This is our ICE NAC and resources page, so you can see all the wonderful resources we have for you. I'll show you that later. But you can see we have a couple of authentications coming in for Thomas. I was permitted access. I used the PEEP authentication for .1x. And that's the simple way, but a lot of times people want to be able to provision certificates. So I'm showing you now Meraki Systems Manager, which is a MDM, and we want to provision a certificate through a corporate TLS SSID and allow access on this SSID using certificates. So we're going to provision that same iPad right now. You can see we're going to apply it to that my demo iPad. And there's a certificate that I want to be able to provision. And we also want it to work on this corporate SSID. So when we do that, we're going to use the EAP TLS protocol to authenticate that certificate. But in order to get provisioned, we have to open up our iPad to this enrollment site for Meraki Systems Manager. And you apply your network ID or however you configure your organization. And it actually lets you log in with Azure to ensure that you're one of the members of the domain or of the organization through Azure Active Directory. And once we get our Azure AD authenticated, we can now begin to enroll this iPad. And we do that by downloading a profile to our system settings. And of course, you're going to get asked a lot by Apple here to say, are you sure you want to do this, right? They have their own principle of least privilege here, making sure that you only install the things that you want installed as a user. But if we go into the VPN device management, you can see we now have that Meraki profile, systems manager profile installed. And it's going to say, are you sure you really want to do this? You say, yes, I really do. And once you've done that, we'll go ahead and it's going to enroll your certificate that we talked about, install the profile. And this is warning you, your computer can now be managed by somebody else. And like, yeah, we know this is what's needed to minimize the amount of risk, make sure our computer's up to date so it's trusted on our network. That's all why we're using an MDM to provision this, right? Now that we've done that, you can go in, take a look at what's been provisioned on this iPad. and you can see there's a device identity certificate for Thomas. We can talk, it's provision some certificates for what we should trust. And we now can flip over, and the .corp network is now in my networks because it's been identified as part of that profile. All we now have to do is touch it. We don't have to enter passwords or anything like that. It will use that certificate that's been provisioned, and we should get access just like before. So real simple. And now if we flip over again, let's test our authentication. Another great site to go test is our YouTube channel. So if you haven't been there, you should totally go. We have we just crossed the 20,000 subscriber mark. So it is very popular amongst our customers and partners. So you should go take a look at it. I run the ICE webinar series, always trying to deliver at least one of these sessions a month for you. But anyway, back to ICE, you can see that we have authenticated with Thomas. This is the UPN, the user principal name, as part of the certificate. The endpoint ID, you can see it was profiled for the Apple device. We have EAP TLS, and TEAP is the authentication policy that was applied, meaning that we did use a certificate to do EAP TLS authentication. And you can see that it matched this authorization policy, which is a little bit different than what we had previously for our internal policy for Thomas that was using PEEP. So real quick, I just wanted to go through and show you how you can do your basic authentication on wireless, because that's usually where people start with ICE, is wireless, because you have to secure your wireless. And then take it to the next level where you can integrate it with an MDM to install a certificate and potentially even start to do application deployment, making sure people have certain applications installed on their computer. You can make sure that certain settings are enabled or disabled or whatever it is that you require to minimize that risk when they come in the network. Make sure they're patched, make sure they're up to date, right? And ICE can actually go and check that and authorize it if it's up to date, to again minimize that risk, trust the user, trust the device. So that's how we get started usually. But what about all those devices that can't do MDM? What about those cameras? What about those phones? What about those other things? One of the really cool integrations we just came up with was integration for CMDBs, or configuration management databases. And basically what happens is you can retrieve JSON data in a table format down into ICE, and we can propagate that into the different ICE nodes around your deployment. And we can then use those as part of our authentication and authorization process. And the reason we can do that is because if you look inside this data, we have, the MAC address, we have, information about how recently this thing was updated. We have a group, we have its operational status, and maybe even a group tag that we want to assign this thing to. So this information we can get out of ServiceNow or other CMDBs and pull it into ICE, because a lot of times you may not have the ability to authenticate a device with a username, password, or a certificate, but you have a lot of other organizational information that people have enrolled or inventoried or otherwise documented this device in its life cycle, right? And we can now use this same information in our network authentication process. And so if you have all this information available, we can now use it. I want to show you what that looks like. So what we're going to do is we're going to go in and take a look at this, what's called PX Grid Direct. So PX Grid Direct connectors is what this is called in ICE 3.2 and later. And I've already pre-configured these, so you have to watch me configure them. But what we're doing is we're going to do an IPSK database and a ServiceNow database table. We're going to incorporate both of these into our ICE policies. And so the idea here is we retrieve this information, we can schedule synchronizations, we can pull certain attributes so it populates a data dictionary inside of ICE, and you can customize the names of these things. And just to show you where this came from, here is that IPSK raw database output in JSON format. So you can see those same fields, the MAC, the IPSK, when it was created, when it expires, who the owner is, what its status is, what maybe department it belongs to, and just a description of it, right? So there's all this information that we can get from some external database, import it into ICE, and then we give ICE some information about, okay, which of these things should we be using to uniquely identify it or correlate it with the logs inside of ICE, things like that. And so with that done, that's what the IPSK table looks like. Now we're going to take a look at ServiceNow. And so this one is typically much, much larger. ServiceNow has like hundreds of columns of data for managing and inventorying devices. And so just to show you kind of the breadth of things that you can get, it can get really crazy. And so if we go take a look at those different dictionaries that we just talked about inside the ICE. So ICE does, and Radius does everything in a data dictionary. So these are all the different dictionaries that are available, whether it's Radius based or these CMDB tables that we're importing. So here they are. There's the IPSK ones. And then I believe we go take a look at, no, I'll just go look at the policy sets. So what we want to do is, first you can see we're going to match our policy set based on the SSID of the request that's coming in. So we're going to do this for anything coming in on an IoT SSID, which makes sense, right? If we don't have the ability to authenticate something, we want to do it by MAC address and other attributes. So what we're going to do is we just have a few things. So maybe we have some things that are out for maintenance, or they've been retired. If so, we probably don't want them on our network. We'll still subject them to this, but we're also going to assign a security group that says, no, you're not known right now. I don't know why you're on the network. Or if it's some of our digital signage, if it's in the signage group and it's operational, we'll go ahead and make sure that we return the IPSK for it and assign them to the IoT group. Same thing for some facilities devices, if it's in the facilities group. And if not, we may permit access, but we're going to assign that unknown tag to say, maybe we need to inspect this thing and profile a little bit more, find out what it's doing on the network. And maybe we need to, provision it or something, maybe get some minimal access there. So then if you look at this CMDB IPSK authorization profile, we're going to return an access accept, but what's really cool is we have the ability to return these custom radius attributes that will assign the IPSK value that was in that database table. And we can either do it using radius tunnel password from Meraki, or we can use the Cisco attribute value pair with that special syntax for the ASCII mode and the AV pair for the PSK that we use for the Catalyst platforms, right? And it will return those values, whatever was in that table, it will return that. And so now the ICE administrator doesn't have to keep track of all these IPSKs. They don't have to be tracked individually by endpoint. Somebody else does that in some other inventory process, but we don't have to do it in ICE. So the other thing that's really cool here is the ability to authenticate with a lot of different types of credentials. So there's I call zero-ish factors to potentially multi-factor, right? And I think we've all done, these really simple things. Really, the standard is 802.1x pass with a password. That's why I put that smack in the center. But then if you want to do a cert, provisioning that cert can be a little extra work, like we went through with that MDM. Or you can even tie together both a machine and a user credential together. We call that EAT chaining. Or what you're seeing now a lot more is MFA, multi-factor authentication. Now, people always think, more authentication must be better and more secure, right, all the time. And generally, yes, but you have to be careful because people want to just apply it everywhere without actually stopping to think, how would this work with my mobile devices if they are continually powering down and trying to hibernate to save power, or my users are constantly roaming with phones in their pockets, or just the general session timeouts and idle timeouts that may happen with those devices if they're not actually doing anything, right? And that can actually lead to a very bad experience. So I really question whether you should do that all the time. And then there's security keys, which I love my security keys. It's fantastic to just reach down, touch it. I don't have to run and find where I put my phone in the house. The only problem is if you don't have that security key, like I forgot to bring on a recent trip that I took, it can be really bad. Like locking yourself out of the network. So that can be the worst experience of all. Fortunately, I did have my phone. I was able to use Cisco Duo to authenticate. So, the lesson here is there's a reason why we have all these different authentication methods and processes, right? Is because different capabilities and devices, different users may need different methods, different access mechanisms, different places, different situation, different context may require different types of escalated credentials of authentication, things like that, right? So keep that in mind. The other thing I want to point out is when we talk about that principle of least privilege and doing segmentation, uh, people think, well, there's, like the Catalyst SDA way of doing things. Then there's, that Meraki thing, which is like, they're just toys, right? We're not meant for big networks. And we say, no, actually, Meraki can do it too. So whether it's called SDA on the Catalyst side or adaptive policy on the Meraki side, we totally support both. They can do that software-defined segmentation. I actually did a Cisco Live breakout. I did it at Cisco Live this past year. I'm going to be doing it at Cisco Live Europe here in February, talking about adaptive policy with ICE and Meraki to do that software-defined segmentation. So the thing you need to know is whether you're buying Catalyst stuff or Meraki cloud-based stuff. We don't care. It all works with ICE. So whatever your security strategy, whatever platforms you're buying, it all works with ICE. In fact, I did a webinar. Scott talked about automation and APIs and things like that. I actually did a whole webinar on how I do my Meraki testing in my home with all my Meraki gear back here. And I was able to provision ICE and AWS using Ansible. So basically I run a playbook and it goes out and I go and configure my VPC, all the stuff you got to do there. And then I provision my ICE node, and while that's booting, I was able to go ahead and create a Meraki VMX and create that tunnel. And because ICE takes 30 minutes to boot, I also create this little, I call it my ping VM. It's just a simple little Linux VM that it comes up in about a minute. And once that's up, I can now test my tunnel to make sure that when my ICE eventually does come up, it's actually going to be able to, I'll be able to configure it. My VPN's working, everything's great, and I can securely connect my home network to my private ICE and AWS. So I've actually done this. I got the automation stuff out there if you want to go take a look at that in GitHub. But this is, and also whenever I do my backups and things, oh, I just saw a question. I think was it from Sohail asking about ICE and Duo. I'm going to go over ICE and Duo a little bit more. Maybe we can get a question at the end, but I have one more demo for you on ICE and Duo. So hang on to that one. What we're going to do is I also keep my my ICE backups. I keep that in AWS S3. So I create a VS FTP server, and I can do my backups into that server and it just dumps them into S3, and I can keep them permanently and inexpensively out there as well. So I try to do all that cool cloud-based stuff as well. So what I want to show you real quick is how we can do segmentation with Meraki, even on what appears to be a very flat network. So what I have here is my Meraki MS390. And if you look at all my VLANs, everything is basically just a dumb data and voice VLAN. I've dumped everything to VLAN 10 for data. And you can see I have a whole bunch of endpoints assigned here. I've got an employee 157, and I've got a Meraki camera at .158. Now, normally these things, if you got IoT devices and users, these probably shouldn't be talking to each other on the network, right? In case something happens, it gets infected, tries to talk to the other. What we've actually done is in ICE 3.2, we've created a Meraki connector to propagate the TrustSec matrix. And if you haven't seen the TrustSec matrix, this is it. So you have our employee and our camera should be denied. We should not be allowing them to talk to each other according to our ICE TrustSec matrix. And if we go ahead and take a look at our Meraki sync status, we have this Meraki connector that we're going to start syncing. And what it does is it takes that TrustSec matrix and it synchronizes it into your Meraki dashboard. Okay, so our sync cycle is now running. Let's see if we refresh it. Okay, it looks like it should have worked. I'm going to run sync now again, just in case. One more time, never hurts to, make sure it's fully synced. All right, now with that done, we should have synced everything into Meraki. And so if we refresh this page, you can see there was nothing there before. Now, all of our security group tags have been synced into Meraki. Our ACLs, our SG ACLs have been synchronized as well from ICE, but we haven't applied it to any of the Meraki networks. So I'm going to apply it to my lab network. And once we do that, this tells Meraki to propagate that TrustSec information, the tags and the SGACLs down to the network devices in my lab network. And so here is one of my oh, I'm sorry, I hit the keyboard and advanced it. I should have not rested my elbow there. Let me get back to where we were. We just enabled our, there we go. On our Mac, I'll make sure I keep my arm away from my keyboard. We're going to log in as Thomas here on my MacBook as a like an employee, and we're going to be assigned into that VLAN 10. And I want to make sure, okay, we got that .157 address, right? So I'm sitting right next to the IP camera on my subnet. So if I try and ping that camera at 1080/60/158, you can see I can ping it, I can talk to it, I can try to infect it, right? But once Meraki makes those config changes and pushes it down to my switch, boom, can't talk to it anymore, right? So this is how you can just have flat data VLANs out there. You can use software-defined segmentation with your Meraki gear, and you can do it on wireless. You can do it on the Meraki MS390s. Those are the ones that support it today. And you can start to do software-defined segmentation there. One last integration I want to show you is Scott talked about integrating with our security products. So here we're going to do VPN. So of course, ISE is the one that authenticates people coming in via VPN. So we're going to use AnyConnect to connect in through the firewall, ASA VPN, I should say. One thing special here is I'm actually showing you that PX grid output. So when you subscribe to that PX grid topic that Scott was talking about, this is what our integration partners see. We can see who the user is. We can see some AD information. What domain did it authenticate to? What's the full username? What group did they come into? What protocol did they use? What's that security group tag that was assigned, that CTS security? That's the SGT, right? Tier 2 users. Because if there's some kind of a group-based policy on the firewall, we can share that information out. We know their IP address to map the IP to the SGT. If there was some kind of MDM information, we'd have that as well. And of course, we know that the session just started at that IP address. So we have all this fantastic information that our security partners can now use to help them make better decisions whenever they see packets coming from that IP address, to know what group it belongs to and what they may want to do with it. So you can see my employee was just authenticated. We were coming in as a tier 2 user, which matches that security group tag. We can see it's a Windows workstation. We got that information from AnyConnect. And now we're going to switch over to our secure network analytics box. And this is basically analyzing all the NetFlow data from all the different hosts that are on the network, seeing where they're sending traffic from, where and going to what destinations. And this is a list of all the hosts that it's currently tracking. And it uses this matrix. I know it's not a very exciting matrix, but it basically tries to correlate all these different indexes for potential malware or exploitation or DDoS or other types of things, and it raises it up in the list and tries to determine when do we have someone that's violating some of these basic policies that we have for our traffic and our behavior on the network. So we can drill into this endpoint that we just logged in with via VPN. You can see we've been here before with all these different logs that we have. Or our last sessions were, you can see that we have our different traffic things we run. And if something looks suspicious, we can actually come up here and we can run that adaptive network controller ANC to nuke it from orbit, which I love the name of that. Or we can do the ANC investigate. So we think it's something suspicious, we can investigate it, change the authorization on that. So it's now ANC investigate. And if we go back and look at ISE, let's refresh that. We can now see that our employee is now matching the ANC investigate policy, and that the security group is now quarantined, right? So for whatever reason, it wasn't looking good in Stealth Watch or Secure Network Analytics. So we changed it. That generated a new PX Grid event. And so what you're seeing here is all the same information, except the security group is now quarantine systems. That tells our firewall, our Stealth Watch, or anybody else that this machine is now quarantined and to treat it appropriately. Notice it also disconnected us from that VPN. So The other thing I want to share with you is we talked about MFA a little earlier, and that's fine if you have a finger and a phone. But if you're one of those other things that don't, right, then that's going to be a problem. Um, so keep in mind, if you are doing MFA, it's a wonderful thing. I'm going to give you some articles on that next, but know that it's not enough, because anything that doesn't have a finger, doesn't have a phone, you can't protect with MFA, right? I'm sure we're going to have some robots here probably pretty soon, the way Boston Dynamics and others are going, right? That they're going to have their own fingers to, maybe they'll get some phones too to do MFA, but for now they don't have it. And so you need to be able to use MFA as well as ICE with some of these other techniques I've been showing you to understand who's coming on your network and what it's doing. Um, the last thing I wanted to share with you is how we do device administration. And this is an article from Brian Krebs. He's fantastic in terms of security journalism for networks. And I saw this article and I thought, well, this is really interesting. People, they give themselves away. So I read it, and he actually pointed to this other article by Cisco Talos where they said when people attack a network, the very first thing they do is understand what is their foothold, where can they go from here, right? So they start to kind of assess where they are in the network, and so they start to run commands like show config, show interface, show route, all this kind of stuff. And so if you think about this, if you've actually done device administration, you can start to detect what commands are people running, have they been authenticated properly, and yet another article said, hey, you really need to make sure that you are enforcing MFA on your network devices, and even on VPN, because people are just using these or reusing these accounts. My favorite was the VPN test account with a test password. Um, if you're if you have accounts like this, you really need to use MFA because people are totally credentially stuffing these things and getting into the network. Um, and so what I wanted to show real quick is how we can use MFA. And so Sohail, this is that Duo and ICE MFA demo that I wanted to show you. So what we're going to do is we're going to go and we're going to take a look at TACACS for doing device administration. We're going to look at some of the allowed protocols like device admin. And you can see these are the basic protocols. You can see they're kind of old protocols. These aren't super secure, so you want to make sure that you're actually running everything inside of a VPN network. You don't want this traffic running over a public network. But inside, you can list out what are the commands that you do or do not want your administrators to run based on their role and things like that. You even have the option to permit, any command not listed below, depending upon how you want to write it out. And then these are the different profiles, different roles that people can have, so that when they log in, what is the privilege level they're going to get? So if they are an iOS privileged administrator, they'll get level 15 by default. And if we look at some of the policy sets, we have one for wireless LAN controllers, iOS devices, and different things. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a new one. We're going to test it out. We're just going to duplicate it above, and we're going to change this to add MFA with Duo. Okay. This is actually a new feature that's coming out in ICE 3.3 patch 1. I'm kind of previewing it before I've even shown my webinar people. So I'm showing you all this here early today. What we're going to do is, sorry, I had to dismiss that. Let's catch up here. Saving the policy. Okay, here we go. We're going to drill down into that, and we're going to add an MFA policy. So this is something you can't do unless you have ICE 3.3 patch 1, which is coming out in December. So we're going to add an MFA policy with Duo. We've already configured the Duo part. I got to save something for my webinar, so I'm not showing you guys that today. But we add Duo MFA to this. So when a user gets authenticated, and if they're coming in to an iOS device, then we can go ahead and perform a multi-factor authentication. And then based on that multi-factor authentication, we'll go ahead and match them to one of our existing user roles, right? Simple enough. So now that this has been applied, we can go off and we can try and perform an authentication. So we flip over and we want to SSH into one of our network devices as a security admin. Enter your password just like you normally would. And then if we flip over, ta-da, we should have gotten that duo notification on our phone. We approve it. And now look at that. We have access into our Cisco CSR router to do whatever commands we want, right? And so now we can do the normal commands, show IP route, whatever we want to do. Even configuration, no problem. And then if we take a look at an interface, oh, I'm not allowed to do that, right? Because that's not part of my profile. I'm a security user. I'm not a network admin, network engineer. That's part of the enterprise network, right? And so let's take a look at our live logs. And you can see there's where I was denied doing a specific command. But if I scroll over, you can see all the commands that I was authorized to do on this device. So let's scroll over and you can see what I was doing there. And if I expand this out, those are the command sets I was able to match. So you don't get the exact commands. You got the command sets, but not the exact commands. To see those, you need to go into the reports. So if we look at our TACACS authorization in our reports, and then we scroll over, you can see we still see that some worked, some didn't. And over here, I really got to scroll this thing over to see all the commands. We have this new interface where you can actually expand and contract the menu items. So now we have more space. And you can see the interface command did not work for me, but the other ones were perfectly fine, right? So that's how we're able to use MFA to protect our access and then go back and audit and see who's entering commands, what are they doing, are they being permitted or denied, how are we protecting our network from potential intrusion, things like that. So, this is how we're trying to use ISE to protect not only your users coming into the network, but protect your actual network devices. One of the things I wanted to share with you all real quick is some ways that you can hopefully anticipate organizational challenges. If you haven't deployed ISE or you're trying to roll it out, it can be a lot of work. And I wanted to talk to you about why that is. So obviously, depending upon whether you're on the networking side or the security side, right, you may have a different perspective on what ISE does, how it works, why you care about it. Then layer on your Active Directory or your identity access management strategy, or your different repositories and things that you have. That's probably a different group. And they're using that to provision the desktops and configure them, right? And maybe to do that, you also have to have a certificate authority. That may be yet another group. And don't forget that MDM thing I showed you, right? That may be a separate group, but that's also being used to provision certain devices. Don't forget those desktop things or telepresence devices or other things that you may have in your network. And of course, there's all those IoT things as well. And each of those probably have a separate bunch of different teams as well. And overlay the fact that you may have some kind of IT structure where how you do your compute and server and versus VMs versus appliances and things like that can make your life difficult. And now this whole move to cloud, right? Does it live in the cloud? What team works there, right? This can all be very complicated. Meanwhile, you're just the ICE guy trying to get something done, right? And how are you going to authenticate all these things? Do you have a process for CMDBs, or how are you identifying these things, and who are you working with to make sure that you can get that information? Hopefully you have CXO and they're actually taking an active role in helping to push these policies down. But otherwise, man, that can be a lot of work for an ICE administrator. And so first, I wanted you to recognize that rolling ICE out, because it does glue all this stuff together, like Scott said, it can be challenging. And so understand that all these teams are who you're going to have to work with to make this happen. And if you don't have a CXO that's really helping to push these things, because if you're trying to tell people you got to go secure your phones, and they're like, no, we don't, and no one's forcing them, then it doesn't really matter, right? So really understand what is it that your organization needs in terms of prioritizing your risk. What are the objectives that you're trying to achieve with network access and security and controls? Understand what your environment is, right? Where are you prioritizing? I said people always go with wireless first. Probably got to do VPN as well. Wired, that maybe people say, yeah, we got physical protections there. We don't need it. Maybe you don't have consistent network devices. You got lots of different vendors and different software and hardware versions all over the place that you have to deal with, different capabilities. And then some people want to deploy so that they just get coverage everywhere for the basic authentication. And other people say, no, we're going to start in one place and we're going to make sure that we have authentication and we have posturing or compliance or MDM. We have all that in different places before they scale out. And then, of course, there's just all those other, I call them, layer 8 and layer 9 challenges you guys have based on their organizations and departments and how you do things in your organization. So all these different things can be a challenge. And then when it comes to writing your policies, understand that you don't have to do everything everywhere all at once, right? Try to focus. Are we doing wired, wireless, VPN? Is it only in a certain set of locations? Or how can we make sure that we have network access device policies for those different countries that have different policies, different government controls and things like that, or certain areas of our buildings, right, may be more secure than others. Maybe they require different policies. Different organizations may require different levels of security as well, or the different devices in those organizations, IT versus OT, may have different capabilities or risk requirements. And then, of course, like I said, on your network devices, who are you dealing with? What are the capabilities of those things? How are you going to enforce them? Things like that. The main thing you need to know is as long as it talks radius or TACACS, ICE can talk to it. So that's really all that matters for us, whether it's device administration or AAA with radius.
I'd like to back that point up. I've been involved in several ICE projects to one degree or another. Maybe I'm just the person on the network team. And one of the challenges is exactly what he's saying. You've got a lot of departments, and especially in very large enterprises, especially if they're multinational, multi-global enterprises, you may see there's a lot of island building, and it's just hard to get around that. In my experience, start with things that are small, easy victories, and Wi-Fi is a great potential. Don't start with OT, where you're already going to get people saying, you're not touching my production line. Don't start there if you've never done this before. If you already know what you're doing, you've got 10 ICE installs elsewhere under your belt, great. But start with those small, easy wins and prove value to the organization right away. And I found, yeah, this right here, these couple of slides, this is worth the price of admission, which was free anyway. So I think this is such valuable advice because I do see the people who try to bite everything off at once. Like, I don't want to go redo something, but security's always been a layered approach. You never try to have ultimate security control day one, regardless of the product, whether it's a firewall, whether it's a policy, whether it's ICE like identity management or zero trust network access, whatever. Take that layered approach and start with the small, easy wins to show the value or to learn your lessons, on whatever just be responsible as a corporate citizen. I think that's great advice. Thank you for that part, Thomas.
Yeah, thank you for the validation. And that's why I want to share this with you, is because I think people say, oh my God, ICE is so complex. And well, it's not just ICE. It's this entire solution across your entire org that makes it complex. It's not ICE. ICE is just the thing that's gluing it together, right? You got to get all those other pieces together to glue them. That's the challenge.
We did just have a question pop up. I don't know if you want to take this now.
Yeah, let's hear it. What is it?
Yeah, will ICE get the new Chat GPT feature, kind of like the new Firepower, so that you can tell it which policies you want and it'll kind of do it for you, right? I mean, so we just had a big talk from someone at Cisco who's a Gen AI expert, Dr. Gaurav, I forgot his last name. Anyway, and so I think this is top of mind for a lot of our engineers. I don't know if that's something you can speak to or not.
I am not aware of any chat GPT functionality going into the product or outside of the product to help you create a policy for anything yet. So I don't know if that is out there, but I haven't seen it. So maybe, but we're not developing anything like that right now. And then, so Hel, I know you had a question earlier. I didn't see what it was, but I know it was about ICE and Duo. Did I kind of
I
show you what you were looking
Yeah,
for?
I followed up with him. We're covered on that one. Thanks, Thomas.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
No problem. All right. And then real quick, wrapping up. So if you want to go try this stuff, I want you to know that we have free licenses for 90 days with every single ICE installation. So if you install it on an appliance, on a VM, in the cloud, however you do it, you get 90 days free to go play, right? So if you haven't played with it, you can go play with it in your lab. In fact, I did an entire webinar just on how to go install it in your lab and use automation to keep getting free 90 days every 90 days. So, I really encourage you all to go play in your lab. I highly recommend that you spend time making sure you test your policies with those devices before you go deploy it in production, and try to start locking people out or something. The other thing is we have lots of integration guides. You can just type in that URL with the tag, and those are all the different tags available to you. And that just shows you all the things that you can glue together with ICE, right? Just lots of different things, whatever you're looking for. And like I said, I run the ICE webinars. I'm not the only one delivering these things. We have other TMEs, and we have other folks at Cisco that help us deliver these. But this is actually old. We just crossed the 20,000 mark. So we're actually higher than that right now. But it just goes to show that I think we have a lot of value for our customers and partners that are watching these videos, trying to learn about different scenarios and different things all the time. So I encourage you to subscribe there, or even go watch anything in our back catalog. All the webinars are archived there. So even if you missed something for the last several years, you can go back and watch it to get you started. And we have an amazing community. We have our teamies like me that are watching it. We also have a bunch of fantastic partners out there and other customers. And so go ahead and ask your questions out there. If there's something you're trying to do or want to know, we should be able to help you. And then I got lots of things I'll paste into the chat for you all to hopefully carry you forward with ICE. So with that, Jason, if there's other questions, I am happy to try and answer them.
I don't see any in here. Let me pull up the attendee list and try if I'll let everyone unmute again if they have any questions. I wish there was a better solution for this.
I'm going to paste this in the chat for everybody if I can find that panel.
And
Jason, it's Greg. I had a question.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I wanted to understand, what is your thought about health checks, and being able to, it's like you were saying, it looks like a lot of customers are really using wireless guest access, but aren't taking the full potential value. So how do you position a health check?
Okay, we're talking about an ICE health check for an organization.
Customer success health check.
Oh yeah. So why not? I mean, it's free. It's a great way to understand, are you taking full advantage of everything? Are there optimizations that you could be making? So really just, I think why not?
Yeah, and the health check gives you, information about not just the health of your current deployment, but it recommends best practices for your deployment, options for, or things to consider on how you could get more value out of a particular deployment. It talks about new use cases that you can deploy based on your license model, or where you could go, as well as, from a licensing tiering perspective. So the ICE health check we have found extremely valuable for customers that's really the first step when you migrate your deployment to 3.x. that you do a health check on your existing 2.x environment, and it provides you with literally the keys to upgrading to 3.0. Oh, and by the way, Cisco CX also can help you with the migration to 3.x for your deployment as well through another free service that can guide you the whole way.
Okay, I don't see any other questions, Scott and Thomas. I got a couple of people sending me a message thanking for the information. A lot of people seem to get a lot out of this.
Good.
So for those who maybe missed it at the very top of the announcements, we will have the recording ready to go. It usually takes about a week, maybe a little less. So probably early next week, look for it sometime for the recording of the event. And if there's nothing else, I'll go ahead and turn off the recording here.
Need help? Call our cybersecurity team and book a consultation with us today.